Hello and welcome to Future Commerce, the podcast about the next generation of commerce. I'm Phillip.
And I'm Brian.
Today we are going to dive deep into something we're calling Mockup Culture. We'll also touch a little bit on our upcoming Vision Summit, which should be taking place any day now by the time you listen to this. Visions Summit is coming to you live June 15th in
June,
Chicago.
not January.
June 15th in Chicago. You can find out more about our Vision Summit, where we bring the best and brightest of the industry and from outside of the world of e-commerce to come inspire us and talk about some of our boldest and biggest ideas here at Future Commerce. You can get more information about that at futurecommerce.com/summit. So, and we'll be talking about some of these themes, especially mockup culture, as we get closer to Visions in the next few weeks. And but before we do, Brian, did you see that Dollar Shave Club is now a Shopify store?
No, I didn't see that. That's funny.
That is funny. It follows a long lineage now of storied direct-to-consumer brands, which have made the leap over to Shopify as a platform. And I thought maybe we could sort of tee up a conversation around that here right at the beginning and why we're seeing that now. Why do you think that we're seeing a lot of these wins taking place right now? Is that something that Shopify is, manufacturing, or is it a factor of timing in the market and the era in which we happen to be living?
It's both. People are looking for ways to save money. Shopify has told a compelling story around having feature set in an ecosystem that makes it easy to implement new features and do new things. And when we say easy, we mean low cost. And so I think that's sort of the opposite of like some of these other platforms where like, hey, flexibility is amazing. And you need flexibility to stand out in the market. Shopify is like, let's both save you money and help you stand out. Like you can have both. And I think the other side of it is, we talked about this way back, almost 6 months ago now, at the beginning of the year at NRF, when Shopify announced that they were going to effectively address the enterprise. And so they released Shopify components. They started responding to RFPs
for the first time. That was a big change for them culturally.
Right. They made some hires to address the enterprise. They built out a more enterprise type selling group, and that was traditionally something that they hadn't done. And so I feel like that has led towards more of these enterprise grade deals. Obviously, at NRF, they announced the Mattel deal, but here is yet another one. Some people would not consider like the business model of Dollar Shave Club necessarily an enterprise business model, but I would disagree with that. I think this is a great example of it's a big business. This is true enterprise grade business, and so kudos to Shopify for making that move.
What do you know in all of your experience? What do you know in how these businesses typically buy software? And do you think that like this Glossier being, a recent one that, just went over to Shopify as well. Yep. And now Dollar Shave Club, we're starting to see these like DTC darlings moving to Shopify. Do you think that has something to do with this fact that they're engaging the enterprise more, and that would have been an enterprise style sale? If you had to venture a guess, because I know you don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. If I had to venture a guess, I'd say that those are fairly new organizations that didn't have necessarily like maybe didn't have as built out as a procurement process as some of the legacy brands have. And so maybe that's why Shopify is seeing success there up front, because this, entering the world of RFPs is new for them. And so, it would make sense that in enterprise business that is also a kind of a newer, more modern business, it would be easier to engage with that sales process. I've also just found in general from 10 plus years of selling and working with enterprise merchants, and their purchasing processes, that every company often feels very different, and the markers for why someone purchases and why those decisions get made is often very different from organization to organization. It could be as simple as like a personality or a person. It could be a process that's complicated. It could be a procurement person that's looking through legal, and working on terms. Like, there are a lot of reasons why a enterprise software sale can get stuck or stopped, or one partner can get picked over another, and it could be anything from a political move to a lawyer who says, no, we are not going to accept those terms.
It's funny that you would think that if you just chose software in isolation, that it's sort of like a menu, right? That sort of
right.
It's like you could just score which
Pick
one
Adobe
works.
or
Yeah,
Shopify or Salesforce or Commerce Tools or BigCommerce or Shopware or whatever. Like, it'd be like if you're just doing like a little scorecard, and you know what? Sometimes that's how decisions get made.
That's just one factor of all the number of decisions that have to be made. Like another one could be publicity terms and using it, whether you can, the agency or, the software vendor itself wants to be able to publicize the fact that you partnered with them. And there's terms around that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah. There's terms around we've seen everything.
with Mr. Beast, for instance, right? Like he has his own landing page on Shopify.com. Like that is where we are, is that the opportunity. I mentioned this in a piece not so long ago. This is a great YouTube short, probably, where Mr. Beast has his own landing page on Shopify.com. Why? Well, it's because this idea of entrepreneurship is so intoxicating to the Shopify set. So they provide tools and every type of tool that you need, right? More tools every day to help you run a business. So you can start a business, you can run a business. And some of those are demand gen through something like their shop app. Some of those are subscription, right? And payments. Recently, they've had a storied past with being able to fulfill and do logistics. But Shopify is trying to court people that want to be entrepreneurs. Who are the entrepreneurs of tomorrow? If you want to do a brand activation of the people that will be starting online businesses over the next 10 years, you go to Mr. Beast, right? And the YouTube creators who have evangelized Shopify to date over the last decade have been sketchy drop shippers. So, make no mistake, right? Like they're taking their own high-low model, and that Shopify has to exist for the next 10 years to have the brand equity and share of voice with a new type of entrepreneur. You have to go to the Mr. Beasts of the world, right? But you also, for today, have to go court the enterprise, because the enterprise over the next 2 years, as we're seeing with some of these DTC, you open this with Why Does Dollar Shave Club or Glossier choose a Shopify? There's an operational cost associated with selling online. And it gets more expensive every day, especially the more custom software you have and the more esoteric or more esoteric your business model is online. By choosing a platform that, imposes a constraint on you, theoretically, you can drive the cost down. Right?
That's the theoretical side of it. I think that the counter argument here is that at scale, Shopify starts to get really expensive because you have to modify and add all of these additional things and have them hosted other places, and you have to pay for all the subscriptions to add on to Shopify, and actually you have to do a lot of work to make all these things work together in the way you want them to. The more complex the business model is and the larger the business is, actually the more expensive Shopify gets. It's sort of the counter argument. I'm not necessarily saying this is true. It really depends on how you do it. And that's true. I think true for most e-commerce platforms. It's all about the how it happens and not just the platform itself.
This is the interesting era that we're living in right now. Shopify is one of the few truly omni-channel platforms. So if you
at a certain scale,
yeah. So, but think about it for a moment, right? We've used Shopify in the past at Future Commerce. We've also used like Webflow. That's not a great proxy for how businesses at scale operate. But having seen a little bit of it myself firsthand, you get a point of sale.
Mhm.
It's fine, right? You get social selling. I can be in the Shop app. I can be in Facebook. I can sell on Instagram, right? There are, just from what they provide you, there's a lot of options for running an omni-channel business. Again, when you're
Yes.
thinking about early demand capture, if you want to get people in at the very beginning stages of their business with this idea around entrepreneurship, there's a lot of options.
A lot of options, and it's
Right.
easy. It's so easy.
It's so easy. Let's shift gears a little bit. I actually have a really great segue here. A good friend of ours who is the premier prolific Shopify developer, Gil Greenberg, a man who has created many a Shopify app.
Love you, Gil.
And Gil is very close to the Shopify team over there. And we've known Gil for a long time, avid listener of the show. Hey, prior guest of Future Commerce come on once or twice to tell us about what he thinks the future of commerce is. He has recently released this really interesting mock-up that he created of a checkout gamified solution for MrBeast, where now that Shopify Plus has this ability to really change every part of the checkout, right? So it's not such a walled garden anymore. You can do these really flexible checkout blocks now. So you can create parts of the checkout that have your own brand experience in it. And to date, some people have used it for various things like, I don't know, upsells, right? Cross sells. But for a brand activation, say for MrBeast, Gil Greenberg created a mock-up of, well, what happens if you have to click 10,000 times
to get
in
a
order
discount.
to get a discount, right? And so
It's
if you want
so
to check
good.
out, it's such a MrBeast sort of a thing. And this is like the beautiful kind of like gamification of commerce that only MrBeast could do, and only MrBeast's rabid fans would commit to, right? This is the greatest way of breaking best practice, and that it does fly in the face of a cult of best practices to say, we're going to make it as many clicks as you can possibly shove in there to get to the checkout. Brilliant piece of Twitter social media content that you feel like could be part of the native checkout. It probably breaks all kinds of rules and laws. I'm sure Rob Freund, who was on the podcast recently to talk about the legalities of running sweepstakes and price fixing, would have a lot to say. He's been a critic of MrBeast's sweepstakes activations in the past.
I don't know. I have no idea what the legality of this is, but
Neither do I.
I would love to put this on an asymptote. So it would be hilarious to have the discount continue to improve, but on an asymptote type graph.
So you're watching.
You could literally like
discount,
click infinite times, but it would like your discount would just be like an infinitesimal amount more, and you just keep going, and it never hits like more than 25%.
It's logarithmic, basically.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
What's really interesting in that respect is when you think about how others are gamifying price as well. Like Telfar, for instance, recently had this campaign where you set the price of the product forever. So they had these drop days where very popular products of theirs, you would go to buy a product from Telfar, and rather than it just getting stocked out because of bots, you would watch Telfar TV, right? And so as you're watching Telfar TV, okay, now in the TV app, right, in that streaming experience, it's going to direct you to where you need to go to buy the product. When the product gets bought, the price goes up incrementally over time. So the product goes live on the site. Let me restate that. When the product goes live on the site, the price starts to increase every second. When the product goes out of stock, whatever price it was when it goes out of stock is the price of the product forever.
Right.
And this sort of gamification of price, again, I don't know what the legalities of that are. It's a great marketing tactic, right?
Yeah.
But what you can see is that people are getting really creative with this thing that's become otherwise incredibly boring, which is out of the box e-commerce has a pattern that everybody follows, and it's the easy thing to ship. But the things that create inherently shareable content And the things that are truly like remarkable and worthy of talking about are things that are building so close to the edge of possibility that it requires a tremendous amount of investment. To your point before, maybe Glossier or Dollar Shave Club's business models were really cutting edge 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But today, there are tools that make them commonplace, and it becomes a commodity to buy an off-the-shelf e-commerce platform rather than build one based on whatever business model you had back then. I can't.
Well, one last thing. And then I think there's a really nice transition here, but like, I don't find pricing strategies boring at all. You're right. E-commerce platforms have turned them into boring discounting games, but that's such a sad and like waste of an opportunity to think through how to connect with customers. And actually, it's in that connecting with customers that we see new things being created. Back to your example of the mock-up of this potential Mr. Beast discounting tool pricing strategy. What we're seeing, and you wrote a whole article on this right now, recently on Mockup Culture, is this idea that actually customers and fans and audiences are now having real influence on the greater brand. And this is an upcoming theme of our Visions Summit. And we're going to be talking about hyperstition and how hyperstition is happening and what it means for commerce. But Phillip, maybe you could give a quick definition of hyperstition and how it relates to mock-up culture.
Yeah, so I'll pull it up here because I really like the way that I framed it here. Hyperstition by definition is really the ability for like a crowd of people to dream something up and manifest reality. So one of those things might be like the canonical example might be like the Snyder Cut, right? It's this idea that was so intoxicating that people popularized online that even though it wasn't actually real, despite the fact that people kept insisting that it was, right? This was like urban myth. Despite the fact that it didn't actually exist, the demand and the desire for it to become real was so strong that it actually created the reality itself. So the brand, in response to Warner Brothers in this case, in response to online petitions and online activism, they followed through. They made the Snyder Cut a reality.
And we actually wrote about this. We were like covering hyperstition before we even knew what it meant.
Before we knew that there was a word for it. Right? Yeah. So hyperstition today really looks a lot like in the age of generative AI, it looks like the fact that you could dream up any sort of collaboration you want. You could for yourself decide what a Wes Anderson version of Lord of the Rings might look like,
which we referenced well before that actually happened. By the way,
I love it. Let's take the victory laps. If you've been listening to Future Commerce and reading our content, you're ahead of the curve. But one of the really amazing things here is that the tools have such high fidelity now, right? So think about what imagery does, right? Imagery communicates an idea to people, and it's like it is its own medium. And you've banged on about this for a long, long time, is the Marshall McLuhan idea of the medium is the message. The message of generative AI is that creative people who command large budgets working for media companies are no longer the only people capable of making dreams realities, right? The medium itself of generative AI allows anybody who is able to type into a text box to manifest a vision of something. And that is hyperstition at scale. So what does this mean? Let's take it back to the original example that got us here. Gil's ability to mock up a potential Mr. Beast activation in a checkout in Shopify. Putting that out into the world is one example of something I'm calling mockup culture. His creation of this form of media, this video of him creating this activation, summoned people from Mr. Beast's team and Feastables, the brand that Mr. Beast owns, into that thread to weigh in and say whether or not that was a good idea. In fact, some of those reactions kind of hinted at, hey, maybe this is a thing that we might see in the future. And we're not just seeing it only with Shopify checkouts. We are now seeing this kind of dreamed up reality of user interfaces and user experience for almost every kind of app you can imagine. There are a ton of creators that are
Apps,
participating in this right now.
movies, like we've already mentioned those, like everything. Nike and Tiffany, Balenciaga, and literally everything. Like,
So if I had to just shout out some creators here, Levi Ironberg, Jordan Singer, Alex Living, Soren Iverson, Shane Levine. There are a lot of creators that are in sort of that graphic design, culture online, and these graphic designers use tools like Figma or Framer, and because those tools that they use to make sort of these funny satirical critiques on apps. So, for instance, an influencer, the idea and the image in the post on Instagram or on Twitter that sort of takes a cynical or satirical line on these consumer apps, usually recreates very faithfully the user interface of the either e-commerce or app commerce or social media site that they're spoofing, and it's to make a critique. So, for instance, I'll reference a couple of my favorite ones that are referenced in the article that I wrote about this. For instance, it was, what if you're looking at the this one is called, "What if we were honest about our inability to eat vegetables?" And what we see is a DoorDash checkout, right? Or an Uber Eats checkout that shows broccoli in the cart, but there's a little tooltip underneath that says, "This will eventually rot in your fridge." Green onions or scallions, it says, "You may not actually eat most of these." Baby spinach, "You will make one omelet and then throw the rest away." For instance, also by Alex Living, this one is of Instagram. And so Instagram, in this case, you're in your Instagram feed, and it's, this Instagram model, and there is a warning that is occluding the image, right? There's this sort of like warning that's popped up that says, "Misleading image. The following attributes are detected in this image: Facetune, multiple filters, misleading angles, professional stylist, recent spray tan, other enhancements."
It's cigarettes. It's cigarettes for social networks, like cigarette warnings for social networks.
Exactly.
I love it.
So it's like it's the Surgeon General warning, as if it came from like the social media publisher itself. So why is this important to understand? Because more people are creating this new form of critique online through the use of mockups. It is very Dadaist in nature. To go back a few years to a piece that you wrote about Dadaism, it's using the medium itself, right, as a tool to make critique about the medium itself. And that leads us to what we teased in the beginning, which is that is itself an interesting philosophy.
Yes.
And it has a name. And I think we could talk about that in depth here if you wanted to.
Metamodernism is the name for it. I think this is really interesting because you mentioned the Dada piece. I was looking for this term maybe 3 years ago when I wrote that piece, and I've worked it into a couple pieces now. The quantum piece that I wrote, which I actually think still, like, if I inserted metamodern into that piece, it fits within my quantum theory really nicely. But I think that this is something that you and I have been noticing for a while. It's when like a piece of content or something is created that's both critique and embrace of something.
Yes.
And so some of these mockups are super interesting because they are commentary. They are ironic and sarcastic, but they're also good ideas. They're also like of themselves, they are interesting and good. And so this is where I think we're verging into participatory romanticism. So back to visions from last year. It's not just we look at an image and like pine after it. But it's also that we can now take part in the pining and make something we think is like an addendum or an addition to or expand upon an idea that we find compelling or want to critique, or Like everything is so mixed up these days that it's almost like in order to communicate, we have to do things that are both sincere and ironic in the same breath.
And that, by the way, like metamodernism as a philosophy has been sort of very easily explained as it's a tonal shift, right? It's a tonal shift where it's sincere irony, right? It's something that understands that there's nuance to the way that we have to communicate, because the channels in which we communicate are inherently like systems of control, and you have to buy into the system of control to get your message out. And that is in stark contrast to what we've seen in the in the past, where
Right.
Where modernism had, you know, a lot of cynicism, right? And postmodernism was, you know, it's like practically a countercultural reaction. What we're seeing now in metamodernism is this idea that you sort of embrace it. So here's a really interesting way to think about this. A great example of modern media, which you talked about in your quantum piece, right? Quantum customer journeys. What was the name of that title? Do you remember offhand?
Quantum yeet.
Quantum yeet. Oh God. I'm getting PTSD. So
it was supposed to be a working title, and then you
think
said,
about one of the examples you used was Nathan Fielder.
Yes, this is like meta modern to a T.
So, but one of the ways to pull off a Nathan Fielder experiment, it wasn't Nathan for You. What was the special? I forget the name of it.
Oh, The Rehearsal?
The Rehearsal. So this is like a multi-part series, The Rehearsal, Nathan Fielder. None of that would really be possible without a tremendous amount of capital and commerce going into it to make it work. So for like episode 1 sort of revolves around faithfully recreating every facet of a local bar, right? And so it is a place, right, to scale, and every little detail, right? It's like meticulous. And the way that they go about that and sort of recreating this place in order to hold this rehearsal requires an incredible amount of like spending of money and an incredible capital outlay, right? Like the audacity of it requires engaging in commerce to make a critique ultimately of the way that we engage in media as a whole. Another wonderful example of this, and then some. It is multi-layered.
It is multi-layered. Yeah.
Probably an even better example of this is Bo Burnham's Inside, and probably the greatest example of all of the pieces that he does in Inside. If you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix. It's incredible. Wonderful piece, like just an incredible piece of comedy, but brilliant art. But he has a song that he does called White Woman's Instagram, where he has to buy thousands of dollars worth of tchotchke to make this video, right? But he, throughout the piece, sings and celebrates through small vignettes the name of Jeffrey Bezos over and over, right? And in many points in the doc, or in the hour-long special, he's laying on the floor amongst a morass of like just things he bought online. Like it is an incredible amount
on Amazon.
And he makes a commentary about consumerism while engaging in consumerism in order to make his art. So this multifaceted way of engaging in media and art has a direct bearing on commerce because commerce powers it all. But I also see that it is now through hyperstition. This is the whole, so what? Why does this matter? Who cares, right? Future commerce. Just tell me about conversion rates and how Shopify has a 36% better conversion rate than every other platform.
If you can cut my costs by 10%, I'll buy your plugin. Just
do it,
my
right?
costs.
Yeah. But why does this matter? It's because the businesses that are building the future of commerce, right? Not the right now of commerce. The businesses that build the future, they build out at the edge of what's possible, which means it will always be unknown. It will always be risky. It will always be an expensive investment. It will always require an inherent understanding of where you think that the world and the customer is going, not where they are at the moment. And at that point, you are obviating yourself from the system. You are moving yourself away from the system. What are you going to build? I don't think in the future of commerce, I don't think that the digital experiences that we build are built by brilliant people that have tons of capital to deploy, that work for the largest agencies in the commerce industries of today. I think it's hyperstition. I think it's the users
That's right.
who will tell us
That's right.
what it is they want of our brands.
Yes,
That is the way it will work in the future, because we're seeing it already.
That's right. In fact, who was it? The CEO of Kickstarter, I believe it was, just launched his own roll-up of brands. This is the kind of expertise you need. You need to understand how people are thinking about and attracted to, and why they would put money into the first run of a product. And then you can, all the repeatable parts, those are stuff you can add on. But understanding, to be on the bleeding edge, you have to understand what people are going to turn their eyes to and say, that's interesting to me.
And you have to like meaningfully toy with the system and break the system in ways that can be broken, right? You can step outside you color outside the lines, but you got to know where the lines are to color outside of them, right? That's
right.
That's
right.
the general idea of what we're talking about when we say mockup culture. It's a very long-winded explanation of why it matters, but it really does matter.
It does. It absolutely matters. In fact, we're going to get into this. Ruby Thoreau, who's a philosopher, activist, artist, and so much more. He was on our Visions panel. He talks about sort of the art of like the shit poster, and like the future of how our brands are going to work is actually through the process of letting go of the brand and kind of handing it over to the community. And I'm so excited to get into this further as we head to our Vision Summit in Chicago on June 15th, because this idea of your brand not being your own now, I think is essential for marketers, branders, and sellers for commerce, because we've held such tight reins. And we just saw the decision regarding the estate of Prince, the decision between Andy Warhol and Prince, where the ruling went against Warhol. This is very interesting, because this is going to give you as brands license to go squelch what could be really interesting and important iterations of your brand that you need to have happen. Just because you have the license to stop something from happening doesn't mean you should.
So I'm not familiar with the details. What was the actual the complaint here? It was that Andy Warhol was using Prince's likeness or something of that nature without.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So it was that Andy Warhol was not entitled to draw on the prominent, basically this photographer's portrait of Prince for a series of images about the musicians. It was basically, iterating on a photographer's art that they had made.
I see.
Right.
That's an interesting decision. We should at some point ask our friend Rob to come back and give us a little bit of the legal breakdown on some of that.
So but what I think it's going to do is it's going to empower brands to really go step up and squelch a lot of this AI stuff that's happening right now. That's all the stuff that we got really excited about in mockup culture. There is now precedent to shut it down. But I'm going to go back to this. Just because you can shut it down doesn't mean you should shut it down. It actually might be the most power thing of all to sort of let go of your brand in some ways and say, actually, participating in the community and having a voice in the community and being a part of the community that actually wants to do something with my stuff, even if it is criticism. It's better to be involved and be a critic or talk with the critics than to go sue them and shut them down.
And stamp it out.
Yeah.
One of the interesting approaches here is like, what is the evolution of brand? So we've watched like the way that the world has grown up over time, right? We came through an era of like a monoculture where everybody sort of had the same experience watching the same cartoons, eating the same cereal, right? Like we had this world that we all have some nostalgia for. We're living in an era now where like I don't know that you can say that everybody has the same type of experience anymore. It's very different, very siloed. Everybody has their own sort of unique experience, right? So that's very individualistic. Could it be that we see that further even deeper in that the creation of a brand become like or the perception of a brand, it's no longer blue sky, right? My blue sky is the same as Brian's blue sky. Even if we see it, like if our brains perceive it as different colors, like is my blue your blue? This is a philosophical question. It doesn't actually matter because the location of the sky we can both agree on for the most part.
And we can also agree that color is blue, even if we see it differently.
Correct.
Yeah.
Theoretically, right? And, right. There is there's like a problem that arises is like maybe we both see brands the same way right now in the way that we see the sky being blue. Right. It's not just that Hermes has like a iconic orange color.
Right.
It's that the way we perceive Hermes has been through a monoculture, which perpetuated an idea that you and I see the same way.
Right.
What algorithmic timelines do and what generative AI allows for people to create through hyperstition is that my idea of Hermes or Gucci or Nike is no longer fundamentally the same as yours.
That's right.
It is
exactly
dramatically different. I see it my way, you see it your way, and the participatory brand, right? There's a new level, a new opportunity is that there's a participatory brand where I don't ever have to have Brian's idea of Nike, Gucci, or Hermes. I can have my own. And that could be an evolution. And that's not for everybody. Again,
it's a personal relationship with the brand. Like
your own personal,
yeah, exactly.
Jesus, but
you nailed it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
This is a problem.
It's already happened. I mean,
it's already happening, right? This is already happening.
My
but
view
wait
of
until it gets
Costco
shut
and
down.
your view of Costco are definitely different.
Wildly different. Wildly different. And maybe you could say that like that is actually the world we live in right now. But let's say that we like made it more literal, where my digital experiences, right? This is dork mode, something that we've talked about for a couple of years now. Like the manifestation of an actual literal, from the logo colors, fonts to the actual physical like manifestation of that brand and the products that it creates are hyper specific to me. And it's only hyper specific to me because I've bought into the hyperstitious idea that I bring something back to the brand to make it mine. This is not customization or personalization.
That's right.
It's something beyond that.
Yes.
And
post-personalization, baby. That's what we're talking about.
And that can't be for everybody. Again, like I have to go back to a thing we talked about a couple episodes ago, which is it, if everybody did it, it wouldn't be special. If everybody did it, it would become its own commodity. The future will start very slowly, and we will see, and maybe we're already seeing.
I think we are, specifically with brand, like product creation. So that I think that we're doing this in a decentralized way right now, and we're doing it with products. Things like Etsy and Kickstarter and the like have given us the ability like to manifest stuff that actually makes sense for a group of people. But it's not done by specific brands in a concerted way, one-to-one. It's happening organically across multiple venues. If you can harness that for your own brand and give that sort of communicate to someone in a way that actually resonates with them. And that's the thing that I think you're really getting at here. It's not personalization so much as your brand, it's going to hit differently for different people. You need to hit the notes that say the things that you wanted to say to that person that maybe achieve the same outcome for a different person, but it's done differently. So maybe you're viewing two sides of the same coin.
I think,
but yeah,
this is a thing that I sense. It's not really been said to us, but if you've made it this far into this podcast, so now it's just us friends, no one else is listening, right? This doesn't go out on the internet or anything for anyone to see. The reason that it's so difficult for us to be prescriptive and tactical about things like this is because it doesn't exist yet, right?
Yes.
And that's why the concept, to understand and to hold the concept with an open mind, is an incredibly important thing that we continue to come back to for years now, which is, it's not about how you can use this today to employ, to have, a leg up in your business right now. It's about understanding the world that we will inherit and the world that is being created today through early indicators, ways that you're going to have to change and adapt, lest you fall to the wayside and become like every other company or brand that's come before you, has become completely irrelevant over time. If you can understand where, the people who stan Bo Burnham are going to grow up in this world and want to find something more personal, and the people who create mockups on the internet of user interfaces are going to grow up and change the way that brands have to interact with their customers. Understanding that today, you have to know how to use Figma in order to participate in mockup culture. Not anymore, when you can just type a few words into MidJourney and have something pop out the other side.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. I mean, I've definitely used hyperstitious thinking to save 10% on my ERP costs.
That's a great way of landing the plane. Thank you, Brian. You brought it right back around. And if not 10% on ERP costs, maybe 36% better conversion rate, supposedly, according to a study of dubious size, which we won't tell you, and or a consulting firm which refused to be named in its own work. So all of those things might be the future of commerce, as we see it through the prism through the prism of today. What a great time. Any last words, Brian?
Man, all I know is that if you click on our link 100,000 times, you're going to end up with a better experience with this podcast.
It's so true. Thank you so much. If you did click on that link and you got here via clicking on a link, well, thank you.
Keep clicking.
And keep clicking. We need you to.
Keep on clicking.
If you want to help this podcast, and we would never ask it of you, it only takes a minute. I'm not going to press you into it. But it super helps if you leave us a review. You can do that on Apple or Spotify. And you can find more episodes of this podcast at futurecommerce.com. If you want to be subscribed to the future, let's say you want to build the future, you want to know what's coming next, you can do that by subscribing to Future Commerce Insiders and the Senses. You can get that through one handy subscription. It's totally free. futurecommerce.com/subscribe. And we'll be in your inbox 2 to 3 times a week, giving you everything that you need to know about what's happening in the world of commerce futurism. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Future Commerce.